Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Chof Tes in Sandhedrin Siluim Frachenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Sun Matzar V'Shivya. Says the Mishnah on Daf Chof Tes. How do we investigate? How do we check the Adam to see that their testimony is valid? So we basically, this is like a beginning of an interrogation. We'll see how the interrogation works. It's different with Dinei Mamlas, Dinei Nefashos. We'll talk about that later. But what's the basic idea? You bring him into a room, and you threaten them. You move everybody out. In other words, you check out, you interrogate one person at a time. You leave with the eldest of the Adam. Okay, you take the older aid first. You tell him, how do you know Reuven knows Shimon $200? You're claiming that Shimon knows $200. Reuven knows Shimon $200. How do you know? Well, he told me. Shani Chayev. He told me that he owes him the money. Shani Chayev lo ish ploni. Shani Chayev lo. If he says, listen, Reuven admitted to me, or ish ploni amar li shuchayev, or somebody told me that Reuven owes him money. That's meaningless. He could just say that. A person could just say, as we'll see, many times we'll say, I owe him money, just to make sure. You have $20. I owe that guy all my money. People say that to make themselves look poor. They don't want to ayin hara. They don't want people to think they have money. Many people say that. I gave at the office, or I don't have any. I'm not liquid. All these answers that people say, right? Huh? Checks in the mail. So people have all kinds of things. So they say, I owe him money. I don't have any money. So people say that, or I could have just said I owe him money. Doesn't mean anything. Who Amar Li? He told me that he's Shani Chayev. He said I'm owing money. Shani Chayev lo, or Ish Plani Amar Shani Chayev lo. That's meaningless. Achi Omar, until the Adam say, and we're talking about each aid you investigate. Right? She says, B'fanenu hodolo shu Chayev lo masayim zos. In front of us, he admitted that he owes them the money, and we'll see you need even more than that. You say, you are my witnesses. Afterwards, that's you bring the first guy. Then you bring the second aid in, second witness. And you interrogate him as well. If their stories match up, they're consistent. Then but okay. Then the Besdin, discusses it and has a debate about if we believe him or not. Shemam is like, let's say the three judges, two say Zakai, he's acquitted, he's innocent. No, he has to pay. Where he has to pay. Zakai, 2 against 1. 2 against 1, you go with the 2. Let's say 2 people say he must pay, that he's responsible to pay. He's guilty if it's a case of guilt, or basically that he has to pay. The other guy says, one guy says that he's innocent, he doesn't have to pay, he's acquitted. Then chayev. So if 2 say innocent, he's innocent. If 2 say guilty, guilty. Let's say one says guilty, one says innocent. Or even if 2 people say he's innocent, or 2 people say he's guilty. If the third judge does not render an opinion, he says, I don't know, then that's not a court. That's only 2. Yosif, you have to add on more judges. As we said before, we talked about it before, we'll talk about it later on. You add on 2 at a time. Okay, so yeah, because he doesn't say Yosef Dayan, but Yosef Dayanim. So in other words, even though if 2 said innocent and 1 said guilty, he's innocent. But if 2 said innocent and the third guy says, I don't know, doesn't count. You don't have a court. Once they finished the debate and they decided they had a verdict, they decided a verdict. The eldest of the judges, like the chief judge here in this case, brings him in. Omer, Ish Ploni Atazaka, you are innocent. Stand up. Like they do in court, stand up and hear the verdict. You are innocent. Ish Ploni Atachayev. That's how they do it then. Umenayin, how do we know? The Kshiyetze, when they leave the court, Lo Yomer Ani Mazaka B'Chavrechem. The one guy says, listen, let's say it was 2 against 1. They found him guilty. He has to pay. And one of the judges said innocent. So maybe he'll come out of court and say, I really voted in your favor, but but I was overruled, shouldn't do that. What can I do? They're a majority. I'll say, remember the pasuk says, don't be a talebearer. If he goes to talebearer and reveals secrets, shouldn't do that. That's a bad thing to do, and he shouldn't do that. We'll have a discussion in the Gemara exactly how do they write the verdict. So you say you threaten them. You bring them into the courtroom. You bring them in one at a time you interrogate the witnesses one at a time, and you threaten them. How do you threaten them? Rav Yehuda. This is what we tell them. Pasuk says, Mishlei, Nesim, even though there's vapor, there's high humidity, varuach and winds, the geshem ayin, but there's no rain. Ish mishal b'mitas sheker. That's a person who boasts with a false gift, meaning a person who lies will be subject to this idea that if he lies, there won't be rain. That's the lies and cheating will cause the rain to be withheld. Amar Rava, a person could say, that may not be a threat. Shev Shani Avikufna, there was a famine for 7 years, Baba Umna Lochalaf. But if I'm not if I'm not a farmer, I don't care. I'm in high tech. If a man who has a trade, Baba Umna, the craftsman, is not affected by the famine because it's not like he's not like he has to grow his own food. He's able to buy. So even though there was a famine for many years, it doesn't affect him. So you could say, okay, so there's no rain. I don't care. I don't need the rain. Ela Marava, this is how we threaten him. Mabatz v'cher v'chetz shanun. Even if you have a hammer and a sword and a sharp arrow, that will happen. Ish onaber sheker. That's what's going to happen. In other words, a person who testifies falsely against his neighbor, against his friend, that's what's going to happen. His end will be with the sword or the sharp knife or the arrow or whatever. Amar Abashi Achli could still say, listen, even if there's there's a war going on, he could say Shev Shani having Musna. There's a plague going on for 7 years. But a man doesn't die without its time. In other words, don't tell me about this. You say because of the sin of false testimony, people are afraid they're going to die. So what? If it's not your time, nothing will happen to you. And Mepharshim say that that's not always the case, even though that's a nice saying. But we saw in the Shoah and other times when, unfortunately, when the Sultan has permission to kills many people, even though it may not be their time. Elam Rav Ashi, this is how you threaten them. In other words, a person can always say that's not a threat. There's going to be rain. It's going to be a war. If it's not my time, nothing will happen to me anyway. This is how you threaten them. Elam Rav Ashi, Amali Nasan Bar Marzutra. That's what he told me. Amina, we tell him this. Shani Shakri, false witnesses, Zili. They are even considered despised by their own employers who hired them. It says, Izevel had when it comes to the Adis of Navos HaYisraeli, the Izevel had hired people who were of low character. Because said Voshivu Shnaim, she said, "Oh, go get two guys, get 2 guys, Anoshim b'nei V'lial, people who were dishonorable, negdo, to testify against Navas. The Yehudu Lema, and they will testify against him, saying, Berachta elim b'melech, you cursed God and the king." In other words, even the people who hire, you hire a hitman or you hire a guy to give false witnesses, even the guy who hires them considers them to be of low character. It says, she said, Hoshiv will get 2 guys of low character, dishonorable people, and do that. So that's how you threaten them. You tell them that if you testify falsely, you will be held in contempt. Interesting. The threats of death and the starvation doesn't bother them so much because it won't affect me. But a bad reputation, there you go. All right. Im Amar hu Amarli. So he said in the Mishnah that if the witness says, well, he told me he owes him money, that's meaningless. Says, but Hoda, he admitted in front of us, the 200 says. Messiah Rav Yehuda, this is a proof to Rav Yehuda. You have to say, the Lob has to say, you are my witnesses. Yes, he has to admit. Or as we'll see later on, they have to be construed to be witnesses there. Either the Loba says, you are my witnesses that I owe him the money, or he admits by being quiet. When the Malva says, you owe me the money, and he admits it in front of the witnesses, then that's proof that he owes them the money. So the witnesses cannot say, well, he admitted it to me. No, it has to be where the Lova told him, you are my witnesses, and it was clear that they were standing as witnesses. We'll see more. He told them, the gears on the side is, You have to say, you are my witnesses. Shimon says to Reuben, Yomi $100. Amalo, hey. Reuben says, yeah, I owe you the money. Lamocher, Amalo, give me the money. Amalo, Mashat, I was just kidding you. I didn't want to, I said, yeah, I owe you the money. I didn't really mean it seriously. Potter, you don't have to pay. Because the fact that you admitted that you owe him money, if you didn't say in front of witnesses, yes, I am testifying in front of you that I owe him money, I am admitting in front of you that I owe him the money, it doesn't mean anything. Just to say, even though witnesses saw that he admitted the day before, I owe the money, I was just kidding. Even if the Tovea, the plaintiff, said over here, he set up witnesses behind the fence. He went over to him. He says, he's not going to admit it. He'll admit it to me privately. So he put some witnesses behind the fence. In other words, he hid them there. Yomi $100. Hey, yeah, I owe you $100. Would you admit it in front of the witnesses? He said, listen, Miss Yoriani, I'm afraid Shema Tachvena Din, you'll force me to come. It's enough that I admit it to you, between us. It's a handshake, it's between us. I don't want to get witnesses over here. The next day he said to give him the money. I was just kidding. Potter. The ain tone in Lamesis, we don't plea on behalf of an insider. And what do you mean in Maces? The Maces is for Avodah Zarah, to go against God. What does this have to do over here? It says more Maces Mandakashme. Who mentioned anything about insider? We're talking about money matters here. Sorry, Mechsra. Something's missing from the Brisa. Im lo ton, ain't ton low. If a man says, look, I was just kidding, we're not going to argue on his behalf. The guy says, you admitted yesterday you owe me the money. And now he says, no, I don't owe you the money. If he says, I was just kidding, okay, fine. But, I was afraid, I don't want to admit in front of them. And, I was just talking. I just was telling you, I don't want to talk in front of Adam. He could say that, but if he doesn't say anything, we don't argue on his behalf. Rashi says, Im lo toan, mishatar isi bakcha, they say, Alomelo, et lecha, I'm not going to pay you. Bring Adam Shavesi. Ain't ton b'shvilo el omlo achreisha des lecha shalom. If you admit it, pay. Bring Adam el Shavesi. Ain't ton b'shvilo el omlo. If you admit it, go and pay. Go and pay. In other words, if he says I was just kidding, fine. But if he doesn't say I was just kidding, and Adam heard that, they could say, listen, if you admit it, you paid that you owe him the money, pay him. Uvedin and afashos, when it comes to a capital case, even though he doesn't make a plea on his behalf, ton low. In other words, we say, are you sure that he doesn't say I didn't kill him or whatever it was. It's a case where he did some sin that he's chai misa. We try to argue on his behalf. Maybe he didn't know, etc., etc. We try to make this. They ain't total basis, but for an insider, somebody who cites people to go against the Torah, we don't make any plea on his behalf. If he's just chai of death because he killed somebody, he did some terrible sin, Machal Shabbos, whatever it was, we try to argue on his behalf and give him we plea on his behalf. But for Mason, Maishla Masons, how is different Masons? Rab Chanina, mi pick Rav Chia Baraba Shemili. I heard from the teaching, from the Shiur of Rav Chia Baraba, Shiny Masons, Rachmana, by Masons, by the Torah said, Hashem said, don't have pity on him, don't try to cover up for him. So that's different. Masons is different. But for Din and Fashos, we do argue in his behalf, even if he doesn't argue in his behalf. In other words, in halacha, in common law, if a man says, I admit that I killed somebody, that's it. He's chai of death. In halacha, a person can't testify against himself. And even if he doesn't have an excuse, but we can come up with an excuse, we try to argue in his behalf in a capital case, not in a monetary case. How do we know that we don't argue on behalf of a masis, of an insider? Now, the pasuk says, don't have Rahmanas on him, don't try to cover up for him, but maybe you can plea on his behalf. How do you know? From the ancient story of the Nachash with Adam and Chava. Nachash could have said many things. He could have argued many things. He didn't argue those things. Why didn't Hashem argue on his behalf? Because since he didn't make any plea on his behalf, Hashem didn't make a plea on his behalf either, because he was a masis. He tried to turn Adam and Chava away from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Remember, what could he have said? Famous line that we use for, how do you know that ain't shlich l'dvar dveira? That if I tell you to go kill somebody, even though I'm maybe chayiv b'dinei shemayim, but b'dinei adam I'm not chayiv, because he shouldn't have listened to me. Why? We have a famous called Divya Rav, Divya Talmud Mishomet. If the rabbi tells you one thing and you have a Talmud who tells you something else, who do you listen to? You listen to Rav, Divya Rav Shoman. So Hashem, the argument could have been, the Nachash could have said, why'd you listen to me? She'll listen to God. I told you not to eat from the Eitz Hadas, and you ate from the Eitz Hadas. So, Hashem told you not to, and you shouldn't have listened to me. Okay, so that would have been an argument that he could have made, but he didn't make that argument, and Hashem didn't make the argument for him. Amar Chizkiah, 3 lines from the bottom of the page in Gemara. How do you know this concept? Kolamosif Gorea. Now, that if you add on too much, you're really deducting, right? If you add on, you're deducting. Shnema. Amar Elokim. What did the Nachash say? Amar Elokim lo sachlu mimenu v'lo sigubo. Hashem said to the Nachash said to them, don't eat from the tree, right? Don't eat from the. Hashem said, don't eat from the tree, but the Nachash said, don't eat from the tree and don't touch it. He added on, don't touch it. Then he pushed her until she touched the tree. He says, you see, nothing happened when you touch the tree. Nothing's going to happen when you eat. Also, that's what happened. Kalamosif, if you add on, you're really deducting. You're making it worse. All right. So you see that when you add on, you're really making it worse, right? Because by adding on, he changed God's words, and God didn't say if you touch it, nothing that anything's going to happen. The Bible says you shouldn't eat from it, not you shouldn't touch it. Pardon?
We say they should make gader the Torah, right?
Yeah.
And here you shouldn't make a gader.
No, that's not a that gader is.
That makes it worse.
No, but here we're talking about in words. When you add on, like when somebody's giving a speech, the longer he goes, the worse it is, right? Kalamosif Gorea. We're not talking about gedarim. Don't do this because you might come to do that.
She adds on, then we're not supposed to touch it.
Right. That's
It's a gader. Not going to touch it.
Yeah. But that's the Rabbanan can make a gader, but we can't do that. Rav Meir Shapiro Amar Mehacha Amasayim v'chetzi arko. If it wouldn't say the aleph in front of the Masayim, it would be Masayim v'chetzi arko, 200.5, right? Or as some say the Gemara says that. It says, if it would say Amasayim and without the Vav, Amasayim Chetzi Arko, if it would say that Amasayim is Chetzi Arko, that would indicate that the Aruch is really 4. If Amasayim is 2 and V'chetzi, 2.5, if it wouldn't say the Vav, it would be what? It would be Amasayim is half the length, which means it would be 4. So the point is, when you add on something, you're changing it. Adding on really changes the meaning and really makes it worse. Kalamosif Gorea. Rav Ashi Amar Ashte Esrei Yirios. When you talk about Ashte Esrei, if it wouldn't say the ayin in front of the stem, it would be 12. By adding on the ayin, you're deducting it, making it 11. Amar Abai. Lo Sharon. That's only an excuse when he says, in other words, when he says, you owe me money. Shimon says to Reuben, you owe me $100. And he says, yeah, okay, I owe you the money. Next day, Shimon says, give me the money. And he says, I was just kidding. Right? So we say, that's okay. You could just say he was kidding and he's putter. However, we said that if he doesn't say that, if he doesn't make that argument, then he owes him the money, apparently. If he admitted to him, and there's witnesses that he admitted to him, then like we saw in the Mishnah, that in front of us, he said, I owe you the money, that's good enough. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Marav said he has to say, you are my witnesses, or it's got to be at least evident for that. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda Marav is saying, because the Mishnah is actually Fanenu Hodulo, and our Gemara said before, at the 2 dots, Messiah, it's got to be evident that, you are my witnesses. If you said in front of witnesses, I owe you money, and he didn't say I was just kidding, that's not good enough. So even if there were witnesses there, but he could have argued, you could say, I was just kidding. But if there are witnesses there and it's evident, that's the point of Rabbi Yehuda Marav. He says, Atem die. It's evident that they are acting as witnesses, then he can't change his mind. But if he didn't do Elodam, so in other words, if he was just says, I was just kidding, so okay, I was just kidding, and that's it. If in front of witnesses, you can't do that. If it's evident that they are the witnesses, you can't say because he admitted it already. But let's say he didn't admit it in front of witnesses in a witness form. He just says, yeah, I admit it. We know that he admitted the day before that he owes him money, but now he says, I was kidding. Then he's off the hook. Let's say he said it on the base now. No, I never admitted to anything. And Adam heard it. He wasn't standing there. The Adam were not acting as Adam, but there were Adam who heard him say, yeah, I owe you the money. I owe you the money. But next day he says, I was just kidding. I didn't mean for them to be Adam. I was just kidding. But let's say he says, no, I never admitted at all. Now he's a liar. That's what Abaye said. Anything that's like meaningless. Like you said, yeah, I owe you the money. It's meaningless. He didn't really mean to say anything. Lo the Kiriyinsha. People don't remember that. In other words, people remember what's true, but people don't remember. I was just kidding around. Yeah, I owe you the money. They don't remember it. And therefore, he's not necessarily a liar because he just said, yeah, I admitted it. In other words, like you have a cloud, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said, right? If you make up a story, you have to remember it. So here, he was just making up a story, yeah, I owe you the money, just to get him off his back. You don't remember what you said. So it could be that doesn't mean that he's a liar. Who? On the fourth line of the base. A man, Shimon suspected that Reuven would not admit that he owes him the money in front of Adam. So he took the Adam and he hid them behind the veil or the around the bed. He was in bed and the guy was in bed. And maybe there were many people sleeping there, as we'll see. So he hid him like in the curtain or the bed that was around the bed. He hid him in the curtain around the bed so that the Reuven would not see the Adam. Omerle, you owe me money. Omerle, hey, yeah, I owe you the money. Omar, Ire v'shikvi, the people who were awake here and who were sleeping, because it looked like everybody there was sleeping. Can they be witnesses? Do you admit that there are witnesses here? And whether they're awake or asleep? And Shimon thought that Reuven was looking around and he sees everybody asleep, so he figured he wouldn't mind. Amalei lo, no. I don't admit it in front of witnesses. Even if they're all asleep, I don't admit it. Say, nobody will come up against me. He says, I don't admit it. Amar of Kana, Amalei lo. He said, no. In other words, if you admit in front of witnesses and the witnesses are there, do you admit in front of the witnesses? It's like saying, yes, they are my witnesses and you admit it, then he can't change his mind. But over here he said, I don't admit it in front of us. Similar to he hid some Adam like in a grave, and either a graveyard. There were many people, dead people there in a graveyard, and he hid some Adam either behind the kever or in the kever. Pain, yes. So he figured the claimant figured that the other person would admit to him, because since everybody's dead, everybody there appeared to be dead. Do you admit that both the live ones and the dead ones should be witnesses? Thinking that Reuven would not realize that there's any live ones there. Amalei lo, he says, no, don't catch me on that. I don't know. Amar of Shimon Lakesh. Amalei lo, he said, no, I don't miss. Again, you're only chayv if there was. Amar of Ina v'temer papa shmami nameha. You see from this case, this is what Rabbi Rav said in the mouth. You have to bear witnesses. Lo shnaki amalei lo. It doesn't make any difference if the lova said, yes, you are my witnesses, I don't owe the money. But lo shnaki amalei, if the malva said, you owe you money, v'shasik lova. And the lova was quiet. Why? Because time of them lova low. Because here the lova said, no, I don't want them to be my witnesses. Even if they're all dead, they're not my witnesses. Even if there's nobody else awake here, I don't want them to be my witnesses. Avali shasik, had he been quiet, hachanami, he would be responsible if he was quiet and like he didn't object. Then the witnesses are valid, and he can't renege. He can't retract his admission. There was a man that was called that he has a kav, he has a whole measure of IOUs that he owes money. He owes a lot of money. This man's got owes a lot of money. Amar. So, and he said, what do you mean? I don't owe money. Man masipi, who owes money? Who do I owe money to? Ella plani plani. The only ones I owe money to are these two guys. Okay, Yisachar and Zvulun. Those are the only two guys I owe money to. Also Tavuladina. So Yisachar and Zvulun came to him and they said, oh, you admitted you owe money. Kamei Rav Nachman or Rav Nachman. We had this in Baba Basra. Many times a person wants to make himself not full, not satiated, makes himself look poor. So you have so much money. Yeah, I owe a ton. You know how much I owe the bank. I have a mortgages and everything like that. So a person says that many times. So the fact that he said, I only owe money to Yisachar and Zvulun does not really owe money to him. A person says that simply to get the other people off his back, to get the schnorrers off his back, or shalos bias atzmo. Says Rashi, Loma Lebrios Chayiv Animos Leponi, Lesrachik Me'ayin Hara. He wants to stay away from an ayin hara. People who have a lot of money can be subjected to an ayin hara. It comes from jealousy. He doesn't want people to be jealous. Oh, you think I own all this? I don't own it myself. The car is owned by the bank. The house is mortgaged.
I'm just renting.
You're just renting, yeah. There was a man who was called like a mouse who sits on his money, meaning he's a miser. Like a mouse, he doesn't have any pleasure from his money. Kiko Shach, when he died, when he was about to die, Amr plani mas bezuze. I owe money to Yisachar and Zvulun. Basar Shachav, after he died, Asu Tavinu Liorshim. So Yisachar and Zvulun made a claim against the Orshim. We heard that he admitted that he owes money to us. Also, going to have Shmuel Verbesikim for Shmuel Amalu. That's only when he's alive. When he's alive, he says, like, I'm renting, I don't know the money, I owe money to all these people, etc. Low. But after death, he wouldn't do that. If he admitted on his deathbed that he owes the money, you don't say Shalas Bias Asma, maybe he wants to do good. So Paro Palga Parga. So the Yisomim paid half based on the judgment of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi. They paid half of the money that was owed, especially to Yisachar and Zvulun. Tavino Dina, lead of Palga. So now the claimants. That's all they had handy. That's all I got right now. But that's what happened. He paid him half. He really ruled that he should pay the whole thing, but they paid him half. At that point, we paid on account. On account. Now he says, okay, where's the other half? So they made a claim against the other half. Tavino Ladina, lead of Palga. Now they came for a different judge. Just like a person who does not want to show that he has money. He wants to say, I owe all this money. He also doesn't want his children to appear to be rich, and people will make a claim against them, and they'll have an ayin har, etc. So that's what he said. He says, no, you don't have to pay. So when it came for Rav, he says, you don't have to pay the other half, because the person could have said that on his death, but he said, I owe money to these people. And if it wasn't done, as we'll see, in a form of a tzavah, in a form of a will, or a last testament, make sure you pay these guys off. Like David HaMelech said, make sure you kill this guy, and make sure you take them out. He didn't say it in the form of a last testament. He said it in the form, I owe money to these guys. So maybe he doesn't want his children to have to pay either. So therefore, you don't have to pay the other half. Amulei. So now the claimants who had collected the first half based on Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi's verdict, Nazel and Otter, should we give back that money? Amaluk Horazakin. Rav Chia showed respect for Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi, was the Zakin. He said, listen, he paskin, I don't want to go against his psak. If you ask me about the other half, this is what I paskin. Now, a new case. Let's say he was moda in front of two people. The konumiyado, and they made a kinyan. In other words, like made a kinyan chalip, and yes, made a kinyan that you agree that you owe him the money. Kosvin, they can even write an IOU. They can write an IOU, even though it was only an oral loan until this point. You can write the imlav and kosvin, but if there was no kinyan, a kinyan makes it stronger. And as you make a symbolic gesture to show that yes, I agree, I owe him the money. You could even write it down as an IOU. If there was no kinyan, you can't write it down. Let's say he admitted in front of three people, like a court. Below kanam, there was no kinyan. Rav Amar Kosvin, you can even write an IOU based on that. It's like a court. It's like a court confirmation. He owes the money. Rav Asi Amar ain't Kosvin. You don't write it anyway if there was no kinyan. Havayuvda, there was a Maisa. V'choshle Rav lohad Rav Asi. Even though Rav at Paskin, you could write that a court of three could write it even if there was no kinyan. He was concerned about Rav Asi's halacha and Rav Asi's psak that you don't write it, and the halacha you don't write it. Amarav Adabarava. Hayodisa. Let's say you have Odisa means an admission, like a deed of admission that he owes him money. Do you write it automatically? We just said that if he admitted in front of two witnesses and made a kinyan, you could write such a deed. Zimnan kasvinim zimla. Sometimes you write it, sometimes you don't. Kanifi v'asvi. Let's say it happens to be a court there. There happens to be three guys sitting there. Not really a court. They just happen to be sitting there. Lo kasvinim. Kanfinu iu. But let's say he gathered them together. Kasvinim. That's if they summon three people together and they this is a court and he admitted in front of them, then you have to pay. Rav Amar afilu kanfinu iu. Even if he convened the court, lo kasvinim ad amrlu, until he tells him havula dana, you should be my judges. If he didn't have that, in other words, if he was let's say the Malva summoned the court and he admitted in front of them, you still don't write it down unless you say you should be my judges. Even if he said you are my judges, lo kasvinan, you don't write it, atakavi duchta, until they actually make a proper court. What does that mean? The court sits in a certain spot until they make a place for the court. The shochi, and they sent him like a summons to come, the lova, umazmina lei, and they invited him, right? Atakavi duchta v'shochi, and they send him umazmina lei lebeidina. Then only in a case like that, and he says, you are my judges, only in a case like that do you write down the IOU. So even though we said that the guy owes him money, even if he just admitted in front of witnesses, right, without any kinyan or anything like that, but to write an IOU, because if you write, many times the guy says, I want it to be an oral. If it's an oral loan, you can only collect from the assets that I have. If it's written, from the time that it's written, you can collect any assets that I have that I sold subsequently. Let's say I owe you that I admit that I owe you movables, that could be cash also, and he made a kinyan, kosman, you can write a kinyan, and lav ain't kosman. If not, again, if there was a kinyan to it, I admit it. What happens if it's karka? Now, the idea of a loan is, we said milvalot on it now. A loan is meant to be spent. So therefore, what I have now is not, you can have no claim on the money that I have now, on this particular money or this particular item or whatever, because that could be spent. But let's say it's karka. I admit that the karka belongs to you. That I'm on the karka, but I admit the karka belongs to you. It doesn't have to be collected. It's like yours automatically. So what about karka? Karka, even though there was no kinyan, you can't write an IOU. You could write it. Why? Because it's like his already. If I admit that my karka, the karka is yours, belongs to you. It's one thing, metalfa I can pay with something else. But if I admit the karka is yours, it's like it's collected already. Ravina ikla lidmaharya. Ravina went up to that place. That's this place called Dimaharya. So he said to him, he asked him this question. Rabbi, thanks for coming. We have this question for you. Let's say he admits that he owes him this particular metalful. Let's say this particular cup or whatever, a bag I owe him. And it's right here, my Omalei Kamakarkadami. It's like karka because it doesn't have to be, it's right here. I admit that it's yours, then it's yours. Since it still has to be collected, low. In case of karka, you see, karka doesn't have to be collected. If the karka belongs to me, it's mine. There's nothing to collect. But if it's metaltlin, since it has to be collected, I could say I could spend that and give you back a different one. It is right in this deed of admission. It's like I admit that I owe you the money. It's not an IOU. This is a deed of admission that basically if it's a proper deed, you could collect with it. Effectively it works like an IOU. So it's not written in it Amar Lana Kisva v'Chismu. In the deed, it didn't say that that the lova told us to write it and sign this v'havulei and give it to him. He didn't say it. In other words, a real deed of admission is, listen, I owe him money. You guys can write it down and sign it and give it to the malva. So here you have a deed of admission, but it didn't write those words in there. Abai Rav Tavayu, by Rav felt, Hainu Rish Lakish is similar to what Rish Lakish said. We learned before that children are not considered valid, even though they're bar mitzvah, they're not qualified to deal in the chasam of their father if they're orphans until they're 20 years old. At that point, they understand business, etc. So Rish Lakish said, if you have Adam signed on a shtar, you can assume that the litigant over here, whoever signed on it, is 20 years old, because Adam wouldn't sign on it unless they knew that the litigant is a valid age. So the same thing over here, even though he didn't write in the shtar that the lova told us to write it and sign it, presumably that's what happened, right? Presumably that's what happened. But in other words, he probably told him that since people signed on it, right? It's probably just like the people signed on it. It's evident that the guy is 20 years old, that whoever the litigant was. So since he can't write it unless they admitted it, unless he told them, yes, you could write it down, we assume that he told them that, even though it's not written in there. Asked him, not all us judges even know that rule. Not all of us know that. Rashi says, that Shnaim Shalo Kana Miyado Ein Kosman, right? You just said now that you can only write it down when do you write it down? If he convened them and he told them, make a kinyan, you made a kinyan, then you could write it down. Not everybody knows that. So how do you know over here that he made a kinyan and he told them that you could, he authorized them to write it down? Not everybody knows that. You think all the scribes know that? So Shalom al-Safar they asked the Sofrim of Avaya v'yadi, the Safar the Rabbi v'yadi. You know, there's many times the Sofrim know halachas that every rabbi doesn't even know. Because the rabbi doesn't even know, not all the judges know those rules, but the Sofrim know that. Before they write it down, they say, are you authorized to write it down? Do you make a kinyan? Did the Lov admit it in front of you, etc.? There was a deed of admission like this that was written in it, Duchrin Piskmi. This is a recording of the judicial proceedings, the things that were written there. It was written as if it was a court, as if the people there, but it's not written it was written like I admit in front of this court, but it doesn't say the words that are standard in a henpek or in a confirmation, ratification of a document, which are the most of klasa. We were sitting 3 judges in front of us. So one is missing, one died or left, whatever, and therefore that would be valid. In other words, it was written as in the lashon of a bezin, but only 2 people were signed on it. Now, normally, what you should do in that case is we 3 judges, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, were sitting here, and Levi died, so only Reuben and Shimon are signing it. But it's a valid because there were 3 judges there. It didn't have that lashon in there. It just said it had the lashon of a court, but it didn't have those words. So Savra Rabbi Lameir Han Rish Lakish asked Rish Lakish's rules, meaning Rish Lakish said a chazaka Besson wouldn't sign on it unless it was done properly. Kedasa Galacha, and there must have been 3 people there. Amalei of Nasan Barami Hachim Nishmei Rabba. No, Kolki Gavna. In a case like this, Chashin Besson, where maybe we're concerned, maybe it was a Besson who made a mistake and thought they could have a case of 2. Why do you say that like Rish Lakish said, if 2 people signed on it, you can assume that they were of age, and you can assume that they took permission from the Lova with the Kenyan to write as an IOU. Here you can be concerned it could be a bezin there's certain bezins who thinks that it could be a judgment of 2. If they said we are in court, then you don't have to write anything else. The Dilma Bezin Chotzefu. Maybe it's an impudent Bezin. The Omer Shmuel Shnaim Shadanu Din. If 2 people made a judgment, it is a bad good. El Shniku Bezin Chotzef. So the Kosabe Beidina the Rabban Ravashi. It's written in it. It happened to be in that case that it was written that we are a court of Ravashi, the great Ravashi. Maybe the rabbis in the yeshiva or the court of Ravashi held like Shmuel, that 2 people is good enough too. The Kosovo, the answer is no. The Kosovo Omerlan Rabbana Ashi. Rabbana Ashi said, the great Rabbi Rashi, the great Rabbiner Ashi told us to write this down as a court document, as a court proceeding, and then that's why it was valid. But if it had not been that, you could have assumed maybe it wasn't a valid court. Tan Rabbanan. So again, is a court good with 2? Shmuel says yes, others say no. We had that machlokes back before in the first parak. Let's say a guy said, I saw your father hide money in a box or a chest, a box or a storage place. But Omar, and as he was putting the money in there, he said, Shalploni, it belongs to Yankel. Don't touch this money. It belongs to this guy or belongs to Meiser Shanian. The bias, if it's in the house, Lomer Klum. Because since the person who's saying this is just one person saying this, if this person says that testifying what his father said, if it's in the house where the person testifying has no access to it, it's meaningless. He could have just made this up. Besada, but if it's out in the field where the person could have taken the money, he could have taken the money himself and done whatever he wanted with it, or followed the rules of the person who was dying. Besada dvarv kayamin. Kol shel davar kol shel biyado. Here's the general rule: kol shel biyado litan. If he had the ability to take the money himself, dvarv kayamin. If he had the ability to take the money, he said, "Listen, this money belongs to Yankel because your father said so, or it belongs to Meiser Shani, and I could have done it myself and fulfilled those wishes." Then you listen to him. Aim biyado litan. But if it's not in his hands not in his ability to do it because it's in the house now, lomer klum. Harei sharo esavin. Let's say these children themselves saw their father before he died. They saw his father putting away money in a chest, a box, or a storage place. But Omar, and he said, Shaploni belongs to Yankel, Shemaiser Shanian. Said im kamoser dvarav, if he was giving it, as I said, as a last testament, says, listen, boys, I'm going to die now, but I'm telling you this money belongs to this guy, it belongs to Meiser Sheni, you listen to him. Im kamarim, if he's just trying to show that he was afraid that they wouldn't take the money while he was alive. You know, the kids want to spend his money. That's what happens with rich people. Their kids spend the money. So he says, listen, I just wanted to say, listen, don't touch this money. It belongs to the Hekdesh, it belongs to the Meiser Sheni, it belongs to somebody. Then lo maklum, it doesn't mean anything. So it depends how he said it. Let's say a man was upset because he knows his father died and he had a lot of money, can't find the money. He was upset. So he doesn't know where he put it. In a dream, this is how much money is, Makam Ploni, and it's in this spot. Ain't show Meiser Sheni, and it belongs to Meiser Sheni. He said it's this money, that's Makam Ploni, but it belongs to Meiser Sheni. Say in Meiser, there was a money, they said, you don't have to listen to judges. Even if it's true that the dream was true, that he told him where the money was hidden, and he found the money there, it doesn't mean it was Meiser Sheni money. It means you can't listen. A dream doesn't mean anything. That's the point. The dream told him where it was, but dreams there's no dreams without shtus. We had in brachas, right? Every dream has some shtus in it. Not everything is true. Just like we said what did we just have by Yosef? What did he say? Where he says, and his mother was dead. His mother was dead, right? His mother died in childbirth, the Yom, right? So how could his mother bow down to him? It was true about the father, true about the brothers, but not about the mother. So you see there that every dream has some shtus. So maybe it was true, but you don't have to listen to it. Lo ma'am v'lo marden. Let's see him come, and he could take the money. If the money was really there, he could take the money. Can't say since the dream came to him, you have to listen to that part. So the Mishnah said, Shnaim Amazakai, if two people say he's innocent or he's acquitted, and one person says he's guilty, then he's innocent. Okay, so they tell him he's innocent. Okay, and we said also in the Mishnah that the one, if it was the other way around, and two find him guilty and one find him innocent, you go with the majority, he's guilty, but the person who found him innocent shouldn't go out and be a talebearer. And now, how do they write the verdict? How do they write the verdict in what we call in English a split decision, right? Just write innocent, that's it. You write the names. Now this goes against what we saw in the Mishnah, right? Say these two judges said innocent and one said guilty. Rabbi Lazar Omer, right? What's the gears here? Maybe it's this Rebbe. Rabbi Lazar. Yes, Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar Omer. Midivrein nisdaka ploni. From their words, we determine that he's innocent. That really means that's a hint that it's a split decision. If it would just say Zakai means maybe it was a unanimous decision, right? Rish Lakish says no. You say these guys said innocent, then said guilty, and Rabbi Lazar says no. From their words, in other words, it was a split decision, but we're not saying who said what. Let's say the judges were not mumchen. We had that before. We're going to see it in a couple of days also. That if the judges were not judges who were mumchen and they made a mistake, they got to pay for it. They have to pay out of their own pocket. So the one that says, "Oh, he just say innocent," Mishalim, he has to pay with them too because the judgment was innocent. If it turns out he was guilty and you gave money to the wrong guy or whatever, and they have to make it up from their own money, everybody's included. Zakai is for all of them. Lamando ploni mizakin ploni chayev. Lo Misham doesn't pay because listen, I don't have to pay. You guys were the ones who said it. I don't have to pay. Says Lamando Zakai, Misham, the one who says Zakai, he has to pay. Why should he have to pay? He could tell the other judges, had you listened to me, had you listened to me, I found I was right. Turns out that you guys were wrong. Why should I have to pay? Ella, maybe the nafmin is this. Do the other two have to pay his share? If they're all have to pay, Zakai, Misham, they have to pay his share too. You guys were the ones who made the wrong decision, and Zakai, and you said Zakai, you have to pay the whole thing. You don't divide the punishment of payment among three, but among two, right? Lamando or ploni mizakin or ploni chaven lo mishami. They don't have to pay. They only the two they have to pay. They have to pay 2/3, but the other guy doesn't have to pay. Well, Lamando Zakai, even the one who says Zakai mishalme. Again, why should they have to pay his share too. Had you not been the third judge, yes, you found him the other way. You were true, you were right. But had you not been there, nobody would have had to pay because we wouldn't have a judgment. There would have been no judgment at all. So it's your responsibility too. Ella, forget this business about paying if they're not. Yes, it's true that a bezin makes a mistake. If they're not mumchen, they have to pay. Should you, are you a talebearer or not? Just say innocent, because we don't want to say who said innocent, who said guilty. Don't tell everybody who said what, because you shouldn't be a talebearer. It was a valid court. The court was a split decision 2-1, and that's it. Just say innocent or guilty. Resh Lakish Omer, ploni mezakin, uploni mechayven, mishum mechsek shikra. If you say innocent, it sounds like it's a unanimous decision. Therefore, you should say, Judge Reuben and Shimon said this, and Levi said this. Shouldn't look like a lie. You should tell the truth. Say the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Rabbi Lazar Islay Damar Islamar. Rabbi Lazar holds a both. He says, on the one hand, you shouldn't say a lie. You shouldn't make it sound like it was a unanimous decision, but just saying Zakai. On the other hand, you shouldn't say who said what. That would be talebearing. Hilkoch Kasmech. This is how you should write. From their words, because they had a discussion, but it was a split decision, therefore ploni was chayiv. So therefore, what we're saying effectively is this: if it was a unanimous decision, you could just say zakai or chayiv, right? If you was unanimous, because everybody agreed. If it was a split decision, you should say from the words of the court, from the words of the judges, it turned out that he was innocent because we had effectively a split decision without naming names. So you shouldn't be a rachel b'amechel. All right, we'll pick them here tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, from the two dots. From these two dots. You shouldn't be a judge unless you're qualified. Qualified judges, mumchen, who are musmachim, taka, don't have to pay us. We'll see later on. We'll talk about that later on. They shouldn't be a judge unless they're qualified.